Son, and the Holy Spirit, now and ever, and to the ages of ages. Amen. All of which community have mercy on us. Lord, cleanse us of our sins. Master, pardon our iniquities. Holy One, visit and heal our infirmities for your name's sake. Lord, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. Glory to the Father, to the Son, to the Holy Spirit, now and ever, to the ages of ages. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Through the prayers of our holy fathers, Lord Jesus Christ our God, have mercy on us and save us. Amen. Lord, have mercy. 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 Glory to the Father, to the Son, to the Holy Spirit, now and ever, to the ages of ages. Amen.
Well, wonderful. It's good to have everybody here with us this evening. Does this seem really loud? It's got one volume, so that's what we got. Well, welcome. Tonight we're going to be talking about icons and talking about the history a little bit of icon and icon veneration, relics, kind of the making of saints, which helps to then make sense a little bit more of icons when we understand the saints as well. And when we're all done, we've got just a little handout to make sure we get those out as well. So if you leave early, we'll just let me know. We'll have one of those for you. So I want to start with a little bit of background of icons and recounting some of the ecumenical councils that we've been talking about, especially the first and second and third, establishing the nature of Christ, and then the ongoing, the subsequent ecumenical councils were the same thing. And who knows who Nick Wallenda is? Does that name sound familiar to anybody? Nick Wallenda? The great Wallenda.
I know he's not Greek.
He's not Greek. Okay. King of the high wire. So the family, I think there's 7 generations now of tightrope walkers across Niagara Falls and buildings in New York and on and on. And that really has no bearing on what we're talking about, other than if you think of a tightrope walker and you think of them being on their wire and holding the pole that they hold for balance. As they walk, they maybe lean a little this way, and then they walk and they lean a little this way. And that's what the ecumenical councils were. It was a swing of maybe too much humanity for Christ, and then a swing back of too much divinity for Christ, and then it kept going back and forth, and we get to the right spot throughout those first 6 ecumenical councils, discussing the full humanity of Christ, the full divinity of Christ, the 2 wills of Christ, the nature of Christ. So that process continued all the way from the first ecumenical council in 325 through the 6th ecumenical council in 681. So all of those years, and it continued. So you had a council. There was a resolution, an affirming of the faith, and then the antagonists, and they would continue again, and it would start again. So that continued after 681. So we had that, the 6th council, and then there was another council in 754 that was just a synod. It was not an ecumenical council, but it was those who wanted to get rid of icons, get them out of the church buildings, make them not a part of the worship. And then in 787, we had the 7th Ecumenical Council indicating that we need the veneration of icons in our church service. And then we still had some political and ongoing challenges, and it wasn't until 843 that we actually have the triumph of orthodoxy and icons back in the church. So a long period of time of back and forth. And what we were doing. And what comfort that gives us is to see that the church meets the challenges, responds to those who are detracting, and has the counsel and affirms what is right. That's a beautiful, comforting thing, that we have that process in place. Some of the things that were impeding having the icons in the church was the rise of Islam in the 7th and 8th century, their aversion to images, some political intrigue with Leo III, and so we had, some of the, even within the church, those who were saying maybe we ought to get rid of these icons to kind of let everything settle down so we don't have people upset. And then, of course, we have the synods and the ecumenical councils where it's determined we need them. And we'll talk about that as we get going. But I wanted to just give a little background because it may seem foreign, like where was veneration of icons? Where did that ever exist? Well, throughout the history and tradition of the church, even the tradition that the first icon was written by St. Luke in the 1st century. So they existed, so where we have the restoration of the icons, that gives us a good reminder that that was part of worship. So it wasn't a new invention or innovation in the 8th century. It was ongoing practice that we had in the church. So icons, they may be new for most of us, coming from other traditions or maybe no tradition, and it may be confusing. We walk into a church and we think, what are all of these? Are they pretty pictures? Is it artwork? Is it just religious art? What are these? And then you see people come in and venerate the icons, and maybe then you're thinking, what are they doing? What's the relationship there? And is this somehow a violation of the 2nd commandment about idols, right? It's not, and we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. Icons are not idols. What makes something an idol really is what we do with it. It isn't so much the thing, but it's how we treat it. We don't worship icons. We venerate them. We don't make offerings to icons. Okay, all of those things would be idols, and idol worship, like say, is more indicative of what's being done to or for the particular image or object. So with icons, we venerate. We venerate them because that takes us back to the prototype when we see that icon. We'll talk about saints, and that'll help a little bit to make more sense with the icons as well. So the 2nd commandment, let's look at that for just a moment. Oh, no, not yet. So why do we have the 2nd commandment, no graven images? And this is a wonderful explanation. The command then is a protection for us. God understood that man had a tendency to formulate gods in his own fallen image. The prohibition against idols was a safeguard against thinking that man could somehow capture the infinite God by using created forms. So we can see that in our lives now. We have a tendency as people to put something that we want to offer worship or some type of respect to or sacrifice for, and it may be entirely the wrong thing. Because we are created, St. Basil said that man is created to worship. So if we're worshiping in the wrong place, you can see where it becomes misplaced and we find something to worship. Money, cars, people, celebrity, whatever it might be. So we have a tendency to do that because inherently we want to worship. But our worship needs to be towards Jesus Christ. So that commandment gives us that opportunity to have that direction. And a little more information about the distinction between idols and images. For idols are the figments and inventions of man, as the apostle testifies when he says, "We know that an idol is nothing in the world, but an image is a representation of a true thing having a real existence in the world." Thus, for example, the image of our Savior Jesus Christ and the Holy Virgin Mary and of all the saints. Moreover, the pagans venerated their idols as gods and offered to them sacrifices, esteeming gold and silver to be God. But when we honor and venerate the images, we in no way venerate the colors or the wood on which they are made, but we glorify with veneration those holy beings of which these are the images, making them by the means present to our minds as if we could see them with our eyes. For this reason, we venerate the image of the crucifixion and place before our minds Christ hung on the cross for our salvation. And to such we bow the head and bend the knee with thanksgiving. Likewise, we venerate the image of the Virgin Mary. We lift up our mind to her, the most holy Mother of God, bowing head and knees before her, calling her blessed above all men and women with the archangel Gabriel. The veneration, moreover, of the holy images as received in the Orthodox Church in no respect transgresses this commandment. So we are not creating idols. The church doesn't create idols for us, but the images of the icons are windows into heaven for us. When we venerate an icon, we are offering that veneration to the prototype, Jesus Christ. And this icon of a person who has achieved what we're all striving to achieve. We're all made in God's image, and we're to grow in his likeness. Those saints have grown in that likeness to a point of perfection, where we then have that the icon to commemorate that individual. Yes?
Can I just add that in our Orthodox Church, if you'll notice right here in the iconostat, the first icon on the right side is always the Panagia, the Virgin Mary, and the Christ child. And then you had just mentioned Archangel Gabriel, and Archangel Gabriel is the messenger, and it's always the third icon over in an Orthodox church. So that's Archangel Gabriel, and this is Archangel Michael. So in every Orthodox church you walk into, the first icon you see is the Virgin Mary, the Panagia, and the Christ child.
Perfect. Thank you, Mary. Yeah, there are some kind of standards on how the iconostasis is laid out. So we can talk about that as we move forward as well. N.T. Wright, who is a modern biblical scholar, makes a great observation with respect to signposts. And he was specifically speaking of the Jerusalem temple as a signpost of a coming reality. And he said that if we mistake the signpost as the reality, then we create an idol. So it's where we place our veneration, what we understand the icon to be is how we can all of a sudden find out we're idolizing, right? So we want to keep that veneration so we don't mistake the icon. It's an icon of the saint. We venerate that, but our worship goes to Jesus Christ, and only Christ do we worship. So that's a little bit about kind of what a little bit of background on why we have that and why we don't have that as a violation of the second commandment. It's not idolatry. So with that and the understanding a little bit of history, a little bit of differentiation between idols and icons, before we talk about the icon itself, I want to talk about saints, because I think that's helpful, at least it was helpful for me to start thinking about saints and then icons and relics rather than jumping into an icon. So we have to develop a relationship. Father Anthony speaks of relationship a lot in our classes, and our relationship with Jesus Christ in our worship. And it's the same process with that of icons. So saints, we have our icons are depictions of events and people, but who are these people? You know, who are these icons that we see? Mary's just explained who some of them are here, but I want to read a little bit more about the communion of saints. The resurrection of Christ is the foundation of our faith. When we stand in the church, our eyes focus upon his resurrection, upon the life that flows from him. That is why Christians do not fear death, for even now we share the immortal and eternal life of Christ, so that our death will not mean our destruction, but merely our stepping closer to Christ. We find this emphasis on the resurrection in our hymns as well as in our icons. Every Sunday commemorates the resurrection of Christ. Yet, the resurrected glory of Christ is not his alone. He shares it with all his people. That is the reason that saints live in the heavenly glory. It is also the reason we can speak to them, because we are one with Christ, and we are also one with everyone who is one with Christ. Death cannot separate us from him, and so it cannot separate us from one another either. For Christ has abolished death. This unity of all the Christians with one another in the risen Christ is what is meant by the term communion of saints. So we have, again, using Father Anthony's kind of foundation for us, relationship. We have a relationship with the saints. And when we walk in here, we can, I hope, kind of feel what Paul meant when he said the cloud of witnesses, okay, that we stand before a cloud of witnesses. These saints are part of what we would refer to as the church triumphant, those who have lived, died, wonderful lives, however, that happened. And then we, being those who are still here, the church militant, still in our struggle. We're still struggling through this life. And as we think about saints, it's interesting the variety to consider of saints as well. Many of these are people who lived very difficult lives, some lives that were far from Christ, and then came back or came to a relationship with Christ and died, in a variety of different ways. But it's not that they lived a perfect life their whole life. Some had enormous struggles. And we'll want to learn about those. But we have Saint Cyril of Alexandria. He had great theological acumen and courage in proclaiming the truth. Saint Seraphim of Sarov. His life was the intensity of prayer. And others like Saint Constantine, out of gratitude for the help to the church and the vision of the future. So not all shared the same degree of theological acuity or the same peaceful and loving spirit, but all had something worthy of admiration and imitation. And so all eventually found a place on the church's calendar. So we can see that our calendar, if you're looking at the lives of the saints each day and you're reading about the saints, you can see quite a variety of lives. Some real characters, some who lived very difficult lives and then came to Christ. So it's great to know the saints, and as we know the saints, then the rest of the worship starts to fit together. So it isn't just strangers, and I'll give you forgive the personal example, but my aunt died a couple of months ago, and she was married later in life, and her husband is still alive and wonderful, and he collected up a bunch of her things and said, "Here, Kevin, you can have all of these pictures." I didn't know who most of the pictures were. I had no idea. I mean, there was nothing written on the back. They weren't anybody from any memory that I had. And then there were some pictures I recognized. But the pictures of the people I recognized, my family members, brought great love and warmth to my heart as I looked at those pictures. The pictures of the strangers were just paper. I mean, I don't know who they are. But it's the same with the icons. As we get to know the saints, the icons will become our friends. They'll become those that we know, those with whom we have a relationship. And that's a wonderful process for us as well. So how do we make a saint? Well, how does the church recognize a saint? I think is our question. I'm going to use the word canonization, but that's not really our word. Glorification would be Orthodox, or recognizing, the saint, but we'll use the word canonization because it's familiar. The process of canonization then became more formal. To canonize someone, the bishops of an autocephalous church meet in synod and agree upon the canonization of the saint, to put the church's seal, and this is important, on their already existing veneration. So those who become saints in the Orthodox Church have lived a life to where the church recognizes that. So it isn't a matter of a meeting and all of a sudden out of obscurity someone says this person's a saint, but rather it's someone who's lived that life. The church has recognized it. There's been existing veneration and meeting. In doing this, the bishops are not making the person a saint, but simply recognizing their sanctity and declaring to their faithful that this person is indeed holy. is in heaven, is worthy of imitation, and that their prayers can be invoked liturgically. The saint then officially has his or her own feast day, liturgical prayers dedicated to him or her, and can be the subject of an icon. The bishops, therefore, in their act of canonization, simply respond to the groundswell of support and devotion already present among the faithful. So we see the pathway of a saint. We see a life lived. We see a life lived that is recognized by the church. And that process then brings a person to that, to being a saint that we then recognize and venerate in our services. Any questions so far? Does that process so far making sense with the history? And yes, Jeremy.
Question, but I feel the need to ask it.
Okay.
How did I get so lucky?
You know, I think with all of us, it's God's grace and mercy that brings us here. Even perhaps when we weren't planning on being here. And it's that divine intervention in our lives. So, and we're glad that you're here. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, please do. Yeah.
It's really interesting because we've had a lot of saints canonized in the last probably 20 years. And I want to tell you about a wonderful, beautiful saint. And his name is Saint John Maximovich. And he is a Russian saint. He is a Russian saint. He was in Russia, and then he was sent on a mission. Was it to China?
Shanghai.
Yeah, he went to Shanghai, and then he ended up in San Francisco, California. And he lived there, and he was bishop. And it's really interesting because my first cousin used to go to a coffee shop, and St. John Maximovich was at that same coffee shop drinking coffee. And then he went, anyway, he passed away. And they dug up his relics. They put him in a grave. And 12 years later, I think it was, they opened up the tomb, and his body was in complete intact. And he is on Gary Street in San Francisco, California. And he is the only saint whose body is still intact that we have here in the United States. Whereas you go to Greece and various European countries,
sure
they
be,
have a lot of saints.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I just want to let you know, if you ever go to San Francisco, it's a beautiful church. And Kevin's been there quite a few times too as well. Yeah. But it's just, they live amongst us. Another person that they say is going to be canonized as a saint, many of you may have heard of St. Anthony's Monastery. I don't know if you have, Elder Bram. He started that monastery, and then he built another almost 20 monasteries, like 19, and they say that he's going to be canonized as saint as well. And another way they know that someone's going to be canonized are the people talk about it. They feel them, they hear about them. I mean, I know it sounds kind of odd, but it's kind of like like St. Thomas, blessed are those who believe without seeing. That's kind of what the saints are, and that's what I can offer you. So,
That's perfect. No, thank you, Mary. That's a wonderful segue into relics. So we can maybe get our minds, as we think about saints, what constitutes a saint, and then we can see a depiction of the saint in our iconography. But what about relics? Okay, and Mary just talked about the body of St. John that is lying incorrupt in the church there in San Francisco. Truly miraculous. And we don't have it out here now, but when you come on a Sunday, you'll see a little gold box that has a relic of St. Anna, a piece of her wrist bone. So the saint we have here, the mother of the Theotokos, our matron saint, we have a relic of St. Anna. So how do we get from icons to relics? And it's actually the other direction. It's really from relics to icons. We'll talk about the St. Polycarp. But working through the process from saint to icon can take us some time and patience and humility. That's important also. It doesn't mean that you're here today, you're hearing about icons, and you're like, oh, it makes perfect sense. It may take plenty of time and practice and experience and reading and studying to where that becomes more comfortable. Okay, so don't sweat it if it's not. So the pagans and Jews took great care to avoid contact with the remains of the dead. Christians took great care to collect and treasure the bones of its saints. Indeed, the bones and remains of the martyrs were not regarded as defiling, but as sanctifying. That is why the Christians would keep the feast of the martyrs over their very bones, for they felt that such contact brought the blessing of God. So this love for relics of the saints began very early, about the year 155. The Christians were keen to collect the relics of newly martyred Bishop Polycarp so that they may venerate them. In the story of his martyrdom, we read that after Polycarp was martyred, so the Romans sought to burn him, but when that didn't kill him, they stabbed him, and his blood then put out the fire, but then the Romans subsequently cremated him. So then the Christians made great effort to collect the relics, and they took up his bones, which were more valuable than precious stones and finer than refined gold, and they deposited them in a suitable place. There, when we gather together as we are able with joy and gladness, the Lord will permit us to celebrate the birthday of this martyrdom in commemoration of those who have already fought in the contest, and also for the training and preparation for those who will do so in the future. From this we see that already in the mid-2nd century, the Church had a firm tradition of venerating the relics of its saints. As the author of the martyrdom of Polycarp wrote, this love for the martyrs offered no rival to their love for Christ, for we worship this one who is the Son of God, but the martyrs we love as disciples and imitators of the Lord, as they deserve on account of their matchless devotion to their own King and Teacher. So the veneration of relics back in the mid-2nd century, and then icons came subsequent to that as well. So those who have fought the fight, who have done so valiantly, are examples to us. They're exemplars of what we are seeking to do in our lives. And in connection with that and the making of saints and relics, I want to just share one little paragraph. There's a priest in Ireland, Father Bill Shanachey, who I love listening to because I love his accent. Okay, my family is Irish, and listening to him, he has great messages as well, but I really love his accent. But he shared this the other day, and his homily was, the time is right for new saints to emerge. And that's all of us here. The stage is set. The modern world awaits the emergence of a handful of spiritual heroes who will inspire and mobilize enormous numbers of people toward a more Christ-centered way of living. The question is not, will God raise up great saints in our age? Rather, the question is, whom will God raise up? It will be those who make themselves available to him. If the problems today are greater than ever before, then God will raise up saints greater than ever before. And you can be certain of one thing, that as dark and grim as things may seem for the church and the world at times, these circumstances, they will conspire to produce a group of modern saints. God will use these circumstances to call forth men and women who will shadow the saints of the past. The church and the world needs saints, people who are willing to acknowledge God's will for their lives, men and women who are dedicated to prayer and striving for virtue. We need great spiritual masters to teach us the way of holiness. So what I wanted to do is bring everything back together. So we have a little bit of history, what was going on, the back and forth of humanity, divinity, that veneration of saints or icons and saints and relics are a remembrance of the incarnation and the resurrection. That saints are real people, And the icons are now our opportunity to venerate those very real people and the relics as well. And our worship is to Jesus Christ. So that veneration is the window to heaven to Jesus Christ. So that creates kind of a foundation for us of how we get to where we are now. So what about icons? I realize that's a long backstory to get to where we want to be. But I think that's important because it takes some of the, not mystery, because it is a mystery, but maybe some of the unusualness of it, because it is coming from different traditions. You know, it's what's going on here. So I hope that that helps to kind of normalize as much as we can what we have here and the wonderful saints. So as Mary had mentioned, we have on the iconostases, and this iconostases can be seen as a separation of the nave and the altar, or it can be seen as the joining of the nave and the altar, what brings it together. And it's those saints, Saint Anna, our matron saint, the Theotokos here with Christ. This icon is an icon of the Incarnation. You see the Christ child there. On this side we have Christ, the icon of the second coming. And next to Christ, the icon of John the Forerunner, John the Baptist. And then, as Mary pointed out, the angels on those two doors. That's pretty standard in Orthodox churches.
Yes.
And then,
the Orthodox church will go into the first three. You'll always see exactly the Panagia on the left side and Christ on the right-hand side. St. John the Baptist, the Forerunner, Archangel Gabriel, and then on this side, you'll always know the name of the church by looking at the second icon, the next icon to the Panagia. Here we have St. Anna and her child, the Panagia, the Virgin Mary, and then Archangel Michael. Now here, the last two icons that we have are dedicated to two awesome people that helped kind of build this community. One of them was Father,
What's his name? You know it. You forgot.
one of them is Father Iacobos, St. James. Father Iacobos, Father James, is from California, not California, from Colorado, and he would come in here like every Sunday and perform liturgy, and he helped get this community started. And then another person, so over there, somebody donated the funds to build that icon there. And depending on who Father talks to or whatever, that's how they choose the rest of the icons in the church. This icon right here is St. Ambrose. And St. Ambrose, was another priest. His name was Father Ambrose. And he was a little frail gentleman. And he would come here as well and help the first 2 years get this church started. So we dedicated this icon here to St. Ambrose. So we have St. Ambrose and St. Iacobos, which really kind of helped build this church.
perfect. Yeah, you can see how that personalizes the church, and you'll see that in other churches as well, icons of saints who have had an influence in their community as well. So where do we learn about icons then? Why do we have them? And we can look at the scriptures, we can look at the church fathers, the ecumenical councils, and the divine liturgy. Those 4 areas provide us a backdrop supporting the tradition, supporting the practice, all of the things we've been talking about. So in scripture, certainly the incarnation, God became man. That's our first indication there. For we know that God can create, and through creation we have signs, symbols, words, and events that communicate and teach. The incarnation of God may be the greatest evidence of this. So the incarnation is a critical element because God became man, and that gave us then the opportunity to create icons because we have the perfect icon of God in Jesus Christ. So we have that icon. And because Christ became enfleshed, then we also learn that matter is good. And it's through that matter then that we're able to make these icons that we have. Yes, Jeremy?
Do you mean matter as in like matter?
Like stuff, yeah. Yeah, Christ took on flesh, just like us. And because he did that, he entered this world of matter, of stuff, yeah. So we can use the stuff in the creation for our veneration as well, exactly. And the Apostle Paul, speaking to the saints in Colossians, speaking of Christ, he said, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creations, and he is the new man, is renewed in knowledge according to the image of him who created him. Okay, so we have scriptural support as well for the incarnation and subsequently for our icons. And then the church fathers. There's so many who address icons and saints. St. John of Damascus, probably the preeminent one, a book called On the Holy Images, great book about icons. So that's a wonderful one. But I want to read a few of the words from the church fathers. This is St. Jerome. He says, we do not worship, we do not adore, for fear that we should bow down to the creature rather than to the Creator. But we venerate the relics of the martyrs in order to better adore him whose martyrs they are. So when you see someone approach an icon and they cross themselves and bow down, do that a couple of times, kiss the icon, maybe they'll kiss their hand, touch it to the icon. That veneration of the icon is a reminder of the prototype of Jesus Christ. So it's reminding us of Jesus Christ. So that's an important statement that St. Jerome makes. And then St. John Damascus says this, I do not adore the creation rather than the Creator, but I adore the one who was formed as I was, okay, the enfleshment, who clothed himself in creation without weakening or departing from his divinity, that he might raise our nature in glory and make us partakers of his divine nature. Therefore, I boldly draw an image of the invisible God, not as invisible, but as one who has become visible for our sakes by partaking of flesh and blood. I do not draw an image of the immortal Godhead, but I paint the image of God who became visible in the flesh. Okay, again, the incarnation, so important in our... that was St. John Damascus on the Holy Images. It's a little book, fantastic. And St. John was later, 9th century maybe, and but yeah, great commentary on icons. Let's see. And this is also St. John. God rests in holy places, the Theotokos and all the saints. These are they who have become likeness of God as far as possible, since they have chosen to cooperate with divine election. Therefore, God dwells in them. They are truly called gods, lowercase g, not by nature, but by adoption. Okay, God is God. We're not. We're humans, human nature. So we won't become God, capital G, but we can grow in our likeness of God. They are truly called gods, not by nature, but by adoption. Just as red-hot iron is called fiery, but not by its nature, but because it participates in the action of the fire. We are God's temple, and the Spirit of God dwells in us. Therefore, since they are truly gods, not by nature, but because they partake of the divine nature, they are to be venerated, not because they deserve it on their own account, but because they bear in themselves him who is by nature worshipped. Okay, a lot of words there to say that the veneration of icons leads us to Jesus Christ, and that is why we have them in our worship. So that's the church fathers. We've talked about the ecumenical councils and how we got to the Seventh Ecumenical Council. The councils have what's referred to as canons or decrees that come out of those councils. And these are some of the decrees from the Seventh Ecumenical Council. It says this, actually starts right here. The Seventh Ecumenical Council decreed that the Church must proclaim her faith in the incarnate Lord in words and images. So the Seventh Ecumenical Council, we need to do that, words and images. In doing so, she, the Church, safeguards herself from those who would deny that Jesus Christ is God in the flesh. On the first Sunday of Great Lent, the Sunday of Orthodoxy, the Church commemorates the final restoration of icons after the period of iconoclasm. So that was in 843, is when we finally had that back in the Church. On that day, the Church reaffirms her commitment to proclaim the whole counsel of God and to hold fast to the apostolic tradition delivered once for all to the saints. Icons, therefore, are not a matter of decoration, but are an essential element to the Orthodox faith. So they are an essential part of our faith. Further, we do not praise the saints, nor do we represent them in painting because we like their flesh. Rather, in our desire to imitate their virtues, we retell their life stories in books and depict them in iconography. Even though they have little need to be praised by us in narratives or to be depicted in icons, yet we, as we have said, we do this for our own benefit. For it is not only the suffering of the saints that are instructive for our salvation, but also the very writing of their sufferings. Not every religious picture can be considered an icon. Above all, an icon must convey the inner spiritual meaning of the person or event. That's why it's so important that we get to know the saints. And we have opportunity, there's apps for the saint of the day, which is fantastic, usually a little 3-minute blurb, saint of the day. The GoArch, the Archdiocese of the Greek Orthodox Church, also has an app that will share teaching about the saint of the day. So that helps us to get familiar with those saints and to understand who they are. And then that relationship develops as we learn about them. And it's wonderful to do that. They're not strangers. They're real people, real lives, real examples that we have a chance to get to know. So the scriptures, the fathers, the ecumenical councils, and the divine liturgy. It's interesting, I heard a priest recently talking about evangelism and how the Orthodox Church is growing all across the country. Churches with 50 inquirers and catechumens, and this priest was saying, boy, it would be nice if we had more focus on evangelism, and maybe less talking about the liturgy. And as I thought about that, I thought, but what would we evangelize to if we didn't have the liturgy? What would we have for people? Because it's the liturgy that we come to where everything comes together. And it's that evangelism to the liturgy. So we have that chance to come and bring that together. So the liturgy. In the divine liturgy we say, we offer unto thee this reasonable worship for those who have fallen asleep in the faith, for ancestors, fathers, patriarchs, prophets, apostles, preachers, evangelists, martyrs, confessors, ascetics, and every righteous spirit made perfect in faith, especially for our most pure, most blessed, and glorious Lady, the Theotokos, and ever Virgin Mary, for all the holy prophets, the forerunner and Baptist John, the holy, glorious, all laudable apostles, and all the saints at whose supplication look down upon us, O God. So the saints, again, are a critical part of our liturgical worship. Throughout the liturgy, we have prayers and litany to the saints and for their prayers for us. The dismissal in the liturgy, again, is a reminder of the saints. So through the intercessions of his most pure and holy mother, the power of the precious and life-giving cross, the protection of the honorable bodiless powers of heaven, the supplications of the honorable glorious prophet and forerunner John the Baptist, the holy and glorious praiseworthy apostles, our father among the saints, St. John Chrysostom, Archbishop of Constantinople, the holy, glorious, and triumphant martyrs, and our holy and God-bearing fathers, and the holy and righteous ancestors of Christ, Joachim and Anna, whom we commemorate. So my point there is that the liturgy is full of the saints. Our worship is full of the saints. Our communion is full of the saints. That relationship is what we have with the saints. So what's that mean to us now? What's our practical use of icons? What do we do with them? I mean, we have them here, and we can have them in our homes as well. And having them in our homes, typically an Orthodox home, we may have a prayer corner, an area where one can go and pray before the icons, typically an icon of Jesus Christ and an icon of the Theotokos. And then over years, more icons, your patron saint, and others as well. So we have them in our homes. And what that does is create a little domestic church in our homes. So we continue to pray there and have our icons to venerate. We can put them in our cars. We can put them in our office. We can put them anywhere where we want to establish that reverence and that peace in our lives. Just as we wear a cross, we have an icon that can remind us of that saint, our patron saint perhaps. But it is so important to get to know the saints. And does anybody have any experience with reading about saints or getting to know saints, or your patron saint, or why that's your patron saint, or anything you'd be willing to share with us about that experience? You don't have to, that's okay. But the important thing is to have that, okay? As we learn about saints.
Kind of soulmates book. 101 Orthodox saints.
Oh, perfect, okay. That's perfect. Yeah.
It's cool for somebody new to it because it's got like just kind of short summaries of exactly where it was about.
Perfect. Yeah. There are a lot of books. That 101 Saints is a great one because it gives a short narrative of the life of the saint. And then there's volumes of other books. The prologue is a 2-volume set. The Synaxarion, which is the 12-volume set. There's another one that a monastery is doing very, very slowly. I think they've got 9 of the months done now. So the saint of the day is in there. So a lot of wonderful ways to get to know him. And that's so important as a part of our Orthodox life and tradition, is getting to know the saints. Gary? Yeah.
Just kind of like practical things with icons. I've seen in other churches people bringing new icons to the priest before the liturgy.
Yeah.
Is that a universal thing throughout most Orthodox churches?
Perfect. Yeah.
What was done in that church?
Yeah. No, what Gary is saying, people when they get a new icon will bring it to church, and the priest will keep the icon back in the altar sometimes for 40 days, and then that icon will be blessed as well. And there is actually a service of the blessing and hallowing of icons. And I'll read just a couple of those words that the priest says. "O Lord our God, who created us after your own image and likeness, who redeems us from our former corruption of the ancient curse through your man-befriending Christ, who took upon himself the form of a servant and became man, who, having taken upon himself our likeness and remade your saints in the first dispensation, and through whom also we are refashioned in the image of your pure blessedness. And it would continue. Your saints we venerate as being your image and likeness, and we adore and glorify you as the Creator. Wherefore we pray you send forth your blessing upon this icon, and with the sprinkling of hallowed water, bless and make holy this icon unto your glory and honor in remembrance of your saint, whoever that might be. So there is a service for the blessing of icons as well. And in that way, that icon is then blessed and hallowed for that use of worship. So it means we don't throw it away. It's kept in we don't use it as a coaster. It's kept there for reverence, for veneration. Perfect. Yes, so that is wonderful. Now there may be different practices amongst the jurisdictions where you see, one that goes back and they bless it and bring it back out. Others will leave it in the altar for 40 days. But yeah, absolutely, that's an important part of it, have it blessed. So,
Also, a lot of times if you buy an icon in the monasteries bless them. That's why I'm always prejudiced. I want to order icons from the monastery because I know they've been blessed.
yeah, perfect.
Instead of, just a company.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, that's fantastic, Mary. Thank you. Well, great. So I want to close with just a couple of comments, and then I have a handout here that I want to share. It goes through a lot of what we talked about tonight, but putting in the context of relationship. So using the word relationship and then the particular, teachings that we talked about. So icons make more sense as we strive to know the person, the saint who is depicted in the icon. Reading the lives of the saints serves two purposes: that of praising the saint and thereby recognizing God's grace and power within the saint's life, and that of offering an example to the faithful who read about his life or her life. Reading the lives of the saints is our way of praising them and thereby integrating them into our daily lives. Our lives will be all the poorer without our friends who pray for us in heaven, cheering us on as part of a great cloud of witnesses. Icons are vehicles of revelation. Just as we encounter Christ in the Scriptures, we also encounter Christ and his saints in the holy icons. Icons provide man a place or a method for this encounter. It should be the goal and hope of every Christian to become holy and to be recognized as a saint of Christ. The Church teaches us the way to achieve this goal. It's through our cooperation with Christ and by our ascetical efforts, humility, and love for Christ and his church. Icons take time. It takes time to become comfortable with, to incorporate icons as a part of our practice, through the veneration of those icons, through the relationship with the saints of Christ. And that's okay. It's wonderful that it's a process. That way we have opportunity to grow in that. Any questions about what we've talked about this evening, Gary?
Kind of a comment, coming from a totally different background, there are a lot of things in Orthodox that are super foreign, and relics, dead bodies, icons praying to an image, praying to saints, praying to someone other than God, all felt very foreign to me. And I think something that's really helped me over the years is whenever I'm feeling uncomfortable with something in Orthodoxy, it feels like if I go back to either Trinity or Incarnation and increase my understanding of those concepts, Trinity or Incarnation, I find answers and I find beauty. And I think that coming from a Mormon or a Protestant background, the idea of incarnation is just something that we did not have. And it has helped me so much to widen my understanding of incarnation. There's a term that theologians use that in describing like this transcendent universal God coming down to a body, a baby in a particular culture, the scandal of particularity. It's kind of scandalous that the transcendent came into one specific person in one particular culture, in one particular town, in one particular time. And that's the miracle, I think, of Christianity. That's our big message, is that particular matter can be enfleshed with God's presence. And remember the first time I went to an Orthodox funeral, I was used to there being a speaker up there talking about the person who lived, and the body's off here to the side. And in Orthodoxy, there is a lot of focus on that dead body, and the person's not there anymore. It's just the body. And I always kind of was of the mindset, oh, the person is in heaven, and that's the real person. And the body is just, it's going to decay, it's going to turn into dirt, no big deal. But in Orthodoxy, you go up and you kiss that dead body, and the priests, are circumambulating the body, sensing the body, and there's so much veneration of that body. And when you think about, tying into incarnation, that body has been the recipient of the real presence of God in the bread and the wine, and God has infleshed itself into that body and incarnated itself into that body. And that body is holy. That body was the bearer of God. And you can make parallels to Mary being the bearer of the Christ. That body bore the blood and flesh of Christ within it. And so, the more I think I wrestle with the incarnation and come to an understanding of that beauty, the more some of these things that I thought were weird and crazy seem to just be like, wow, that is really beautiful, actually. There's so many lessons to be learned from having a session in front of this piece of wood that is an image of a window past the wood into something transcendent. So that's been something that's helped me a lot.
Excellent. That's fantastic, and a great reminder as we're moving forward. When we hit something that's unusual, something that's challenging, return to something that we can struggle with in the incarnation, something that we feel that we've got maybe a beginning of an understanding, and let that help us with the other things that are challenging to us. And the body in an Orthodox funeral, I had the same experience when I first attended an Orthodox funeral. I thought, well, this is very different. But, the body, that very body, all the things you've mentioned of that body, and that's the very body that person worked out their salvation in. And what a beautiful thing to see that they worked out their salvation in that body. It's not just a meat taxi or whatever, some would say just a throwaway piece after, the end of this life. But it's very, very important. Jeremy.
I'm so glad to be in that compliment. That makes me feel a lot more comfortable to make this compliment, which is when I am confronted with misunderstanding orthodoxy, especially when I completely understand it to be true, which is really hard for me sometimes, I go back to that same thing kind of as well. And for me, so far the most accurate way I can say this, I guess, is that I believe I was given my testimony on June 1st because it forced me to have to be honest, even though it was disgustingly uncomfortable. And so no matter what, I truly believe this in my entire body and soul, that honesty is the best policy, no matter what, period.
when I discovered Christ through the truth, it just kind of set me free and kind of made my entire family go crazy.
Well, I'm glad you're here with us now.
I am so much.
Perfect. Aaron.
I think the book right now that if anyone wants to get really deep down the hole of icons by priest monk Father Maximus Constas, called RC. It goes deep.
Oh,
So
fantastic.
if you want to know, it's hard to read. It's not like, maybe not read it if you're trying to press, but like, I mean, because he's a professor. He's been a professor all kinds of places. It's expository, but it goes over like paradox and like
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
it's called the art of seeing.
Excellent. Thank you.
Also, he gave an awesome presentation, and I want to say it was at the University of somewhere in the middle part of the United States, and I can't remember, but he does a beautiful lecture on iconography, and I can go ahead and I can forward that all to you.
Oh,
Yeah,
perfect.
he's an artist and he was a professor, and then he became a monk. So, and now, yeah, he's very, very gifted, very visual. So
Wonderful.
he has a lot of stuff on icons. He's the authority to me. Like I think he's the
Perfect. Wonderful. That's great. And that process and other resources of continuing to grow and to become familiar is fantastic. Well, thank you very much. Don't leave. I want to give you one of these handouts, but I'm going to go turn off the recording before we do that. So I'll be right back. Or you can hand that out. I'll be right back.
And then I just want